Thank you, Dr. Klausman. As he said, I'm Kristen, Padilla, and I lead our Center for Women in Ministry at Beeson. Just to continue what was already said about this event, one of the things expressed in that meeting, if I remember correctly, was just needing positive examples of women who have navigated the path into church ministry, into Christian ministry. For women who are called to ministry, one of the challenges, and I'm speaking as one, is not seeing a clear path. What does that path look like into ministry, especially when there are fewer opportunities for women to serve on a church staff? So the goal of this event is to open your imaginations, to paint a picture of what God can do and has done through each of these women and their stories. And hopefully along the way, they'll explain how they found their path into ministry. And we want this to be an event that is helpful to men as well. So we have some questions about just male-female relationships in ministry. I invited 4 of my friends, which is always fun to host an event when you can invite friends to it, and I want to introduce you to them. Before I introduce them, I just want to say a word about our time together. I have some prepared questions that Theta Alpha Kappa and the Center prepared. They have already received the questions, and after I ask my questions, we're going to open up to you all for a time of Q&A. At any time, if you want to go back to the back and get more food, tea, coffee, water, please do so. This is we want this to feel very conversational. It's a dialogue. So, and then one other announcement: on the tables are cards just describing the work at the center. Our website is on the card. If you want to receive our monthly newsletters with other events and resources, you can subscribe on the website. Okay, so we have today the first lady closest to me is Lisa Davis, and she is the Discipleship Minister at Shades Mountain Baptist Church in Birmingham. And then next to her is Cecelia Walker. She is Associate Minister at Birmingham's Greater Shiloh Baptist Church, and she's the Executive Director of Chaplaincy and Clinical Pastoral Education for Brookwood Baptist Health System. Next to her is Abby Gatliff. She is an Assistant Minister for Student and Family Discipleship at South Highland Presbyterian Church here in Birmingham. And then finally, Aubrey Johnston, who is Associate Minister to Students at Dawson Memorial Baptist Church in Birmingham. So thank you all for being here today. I want to begin by asking you, and we'll just, no order, so you all can fight to see who goes first. But how did you discern God was calling you into vocational ministry, and how are you continuing to pursue that call? And if you want to also share any other personal remarks about yourself for the group, you can do that as well.
We're not going to waste time with that. Hi, I'm Abby, and the first question is, how did I discern God was calling me? I'm a good Presbyterian, which means that we think that there's an internal calling that happens, are you created with passions to be in ministry? Are you drawn to serving others in a vocational sort of way? And then also an external affirmation of that. So I had a lot of friends and family that were really affirming to me when I started to say, hey, I think I might want to go work in the church and not work at a bank anymore. And everyone was like, yeah, that's a no-brainer for you based on what we know about you. And so that was sort of for me kind of having both that feeling, but then also having other people in my life that knew me pretty well affirming that. And how I'm still pursuing that call, I guess I'm just sort of continuing through doors that opened before me. But currently, my husband, who works with me, we're both pastors on staff at our church. We are both getting ordained November 20th. So we're super excited. It's been a long time coming. And that is the next big milestone for us. So we're really looking forward to that.
I can go next. So I am the youngest here, and probably the most relatable to the ones who are specifically in the same season that I was in about 5 years ago. So I went to Samford, then went to Beeson, and I really think that vocational call started by some classes of people in this room, and just experiencing religious classes. I went to a public school in high school, and so that was really my first setting of studying God's Word, and was a family studies major in undergrad, and so I knew I wanted to go into a helping profession. But through having experiences of serving in ministry roles, so running a ministry here on campus for women, and then getting to serve as various interns were really the places that I just saw myself being called to vocational ministry. And when it came to that grad school experience, or decision, it was a toss between, do I want to be a counselor? Do I want to be in full-time ministry? And God just continued to open the doors into vocational ministry, and allow me to see that getting my MDiv and pursuing that career really was going to allow me to use those people skills, but also use those skills of my love for God's Word. So really, I would say the places that I felt like were the most leading in that calling were people who were mentoring me and calling that out in me, and then getting to study in school. And I really think that my call to vocational ministry started when I accepted this position at Dawson. I've been there for about a year and a half. I was doing college ministry before and loving getting to disciple girls and learn to really share God's Word, but stepping into this position has really been the first time that I've been living the full vocational role of minister. So that's a little bit on me.
I'm Cecelia, and I would say that my call to ministry really happened even before I knew I was being called. As a child, my grandfather, who is my maternal grandfather, died when I was 5. But I remember him distinctively telling me, Cece, you're going to do great things for God. And I kept trying to figure out, what does that mean? And both of my grandfathers, all of my uncles on both sides of my family were pastors, Baptist pastors. And so then I had all of these women around me who had really strong faith and were leaders in the congregation, but they were pastors' wives. So I thought, well, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to be a pastor's wife, and that's how I'm going to be in ministry. But as life continued and I continued to serve in the church, continued to love God's people, I became a librarian, and I did that for a long time. And then God just started impressing upon me that he wanted me to, he was calling me into ministry, and he wanted me trained. And I ended up at Beeson through all kinds of things that I thought never would happen. I thought that if I go to work at the library and tell them that I am called to ministry and I need to go to Beeson and they only have classes during the day, that they're definitely going to tell me no. I was the first and only person that they ever allowed to just be off during the day, work on the weekends and at night so that they could pursue this degree. And so the doors just kept opening and opening. And by the time I finished at Beeson, I still had no clear idea of what I was going to do. But I had thought of 2 really difficult, hard days in my life. One was the day that my father died. And he died at Cooper Green, the indigent hospital in Jefferson County. And when I went to see him, and my mom was with me, it was despicable the way that they informed us and the way that he was left. A couple of years later, my husband died, and it was a sudden death, and he was at St. Vincent's. A chaplain came and asked me would I like to go see him, and I said no, remembering what I had been through. But he said, I'll be with you, and I'll go with you, and it's something you need to do. And he went with me and my mom, and it was like Jeffrey was asleep. And I was able to say goodbye to him and to be present with him as long as I wanted to. And that chaplain was there. So when I was ending up my time at Beeson, I started thinking about those times. And I called that chaplain and asked him, well, how do you do that? What training do you need? And I had heard of CPE, but really had not been paying very much attention because this is my second career. And so I had 2 children that I was raising. I was really busy. I didn't really think about taking CPE when I was in school. And he talked to me and told me how to start that training. And, and once I got there, and started doing the work, then I realized that this is me. This is something I've been doing. People would come into the library and have problems, and I said, let's go over here and pray. And so I've been doing this all of my life, but now I'm in an opportunity to get trained for it, and I just continue to grow. I became a chaplain, and now I'm also an educator, and it just keeps building, and God keeps opening these doors for me to continue to grow in that way. And I'm one of those chaplains who it's important to me that I'm also connected to the local church. So I can't do the one without the other. There are some chaplains you might meet that they only want to do the chaplaincy and that's their life, that's their business. But for me, I have to be active in the church and giving back and demonstrating not only to women, but to young girls who are growing up that ordained ministry is a possibility for us in the Baptist church.
I'm Lisa Davis. I serve at Shades Mountain here in Birmingham. Have been there since 1995. I was called to ministry as a high school senior. My dad was a minister of music, and I basically followed him around all of my life. I was his little helper, and it was just a natural calling when I got to high school and trying to think toward college and what I was going to do. I didn't really know other women in ministry. This was the mid-'70s. And, I knew people who worked at churches, but I really didn't know a woman who had gone to seminary. But I went on to seminary. I met my husband while we were in seminary. When we finished, he was a pastor. And for 14 years, I was a pastor's wife and a mom and the best volunteer that church ever had because I wanted to be involved in every single ministry. And I was. After 14 years, he had to step away from ministry due to just ridiculously bad decisions he had made. And it became clear then that maybe I was the one who was going to serve as the minister, although there wasn't a plan. And because we had nowhere to go, because neither of us knew how to do anything but serve in a church, and I had not worked in 14 years since I had finished seminary, we had to move in with his parents for a short time. And during that time, they just happened to have joined Shades Mountain Baptist 2 years previously. And so we just really went to the church to hide and to heal. And about 6 months later, the Minister of Education, Bill Reed, called me and asked if I would like to come work in the children's office as an assistant. And I did that for a year. A year later, the children's minister left, and he said, so what are we going to do? It's like, I don't know, we can give it a try. And so I worked as interim children's minister. And 17 years later, I was still not the interim, but I was the children's minister. During that time, during that 17 years, my husband died. He actually died by suicide. And I stayed on at Shades. It was, God had just surrounded me by all these great people. And my sons were out of college by then. They were young adults. And a few years later, I remarried a pastor in Shreveport, Louisiana. So I left Shades and I moved to Shreveport, and 11 months later, he died of aplastic anemia. So I was in Shreveport, my kids were in Birmingham, my parents were well and healthy, and it was like I was 20 years old again. And I could go anywhere in the world, I could do anything, and I thought, I'm going to do something really exotic for a few years, and then when the grandkids start coming, I'm going to go back to Birmingham. And I just waited. For about 14 months, I waited to see what God had for me. I stayed in Shreveport. And lo and behold, one afternoon, I got a phone call, and it was Shades Mountain Baptist Church in Birmingham asking if I wanted to come back and direct the Early Learning Center. And my first words were, you do know I don't do preschoolers. And the answer was, we know that. You do parents and teachers, but we know you don't do preschool. And that's what you'll do at the ELC. And so I came back and I thought, my great exotic years as an ELC director part-time. But a year later, the preschool minister retired, and I moved back onto ministerial staff as preschool and family minister. Family 100%, preschool sort of 0%, but it balanced out, so it worked well. And then about a year later, an opportunity opened up in the adult ministry. And I moved into adult ministry, and in 2019, I was able to move on to the executive staff at the church, and I serve now as discipleship minister for the past several years at Shades. And so my calling, how do I continue to pursue my calling? I win the prize. We had a staff gathering a while back on who had the most jobs at Shades, and I won. I've had 7 different positions at Shades, and I think I'm in my final resting place as discipleship minister for the remainder of my days, but the remainder of my days at Shades. And I continue to pursue ministry calling because each of these different positions has challenged me greatly. And in 2016, at 58 years old, I went back to school and completed my doctorate, or started and completed my doctorate. And so life has just been a great journey. I had a specific call to local church ministry, and even as a volunteer the first 14 years, and then these past 25 years in vocational, and the journey is truly a joy.
Isn't this fun? I'm sorry about our mic situation. Maybe all of you mentioned seminary, and I know that we all know now that you have all gone to seminary. So why did you go to seminary? If you briefly, all the positive things, your wonderful experience in seminary, but how has theological education helped you be a better minister today? Do you want to put that back? I don't want to lean across.
Well, I'll just finish and then we'll pass it on back. I would not trade anything for my education. I don't know, I can't say for sure if it's made a difference in the opportunities I've had at Shades, because we have some women on staff who have not been to seminary. I wouldn't trade anything for the relationships that I built while I was in seminary, for the way it has made me think, particularly when I went back the second time. I was just sharing earlier with Dr. Champa that the first paper I turned in 2016, the last paper I had turned in was 1982, typed on a Selectric typewriter and a piece of paper handed to the professor. And my brain cells literally woke up. And so there's nothing to exchange for education, just in the way you can relate to people, the way I think the church looks at you as, I've done my work and prepared myself the best I can for my job, and so have you. And I think there's just a respect that's given to us because we've done our work and we are as well prepared as we can be for what God's called us to do.
Yeah, I would echo that. I serve on Samford's Board of Trustees, and one of the things that I say all the time is that my degree or education from Beeson is the gift that keeps on giving. And I went to the ITC Morehouse School of Religion and got my DMin. I was called, when God called me into vocational ministry, He made it clear that He wanted me trained, and I couldn't really understand. And God just gives me just enough light for the step I'm on. You know, I don't ever know what's coming next, but I know His voice and I know how to obey that. And so I looked into Beeson because it was accredited. It was here. If I'm going to do it, I'm not going to have to. And so going to Beeson helped, it deepened my personal Bible study. It helped me in the local church as I continue to teach. And then it also connects me with resources, not just the books and how to do research, but people. And how many of these professors that continue to speak into my life and to help me to expand my ministry. I can reach out to these ministers, these professors at Beeson, and they'll come and they'll speak to my students, and and it's just been really helpful. So it's been a great resource, helping me to grow, helping those that I teach to grow, and I also wouldn't trade it for anything.
When I decided to go to seminary, that was sort of my first step to respond to this call that God had placed on my life. And my husband and I both grew up, and at the time we're in a very, and we are very theologically conservative, but we're trying to figure out, okay, so we're theologically conservative, but nowhere that we've been to church allows women to serve in ministry in the ways that I felt like I was being called and led. So we were sort of stuck, and I didn't really know what ministry would even look like for me. So for me, seminary really was this first step of trying to figure out, okay, what is the Lord calling me to? And I really saw it as an opportunity for me to just learn as much as I could, so that wherever I ended up, I'd be able to share it with people that don't have the resources or time to go to seminary and learn as much as they can. And right now I'm leading this women's Bible study through Deuteronomy, and most of the women have never ever read it before, and they don't have the time to look up all the different things, but I'm able to do that and sort of filter through and really just learn a little bit ahead of them and then share that information with them. And so like most of that background comes from my time at seminary, that really equipped me to be able to do something like that.
So I was a senior here at Samford, and Matt Curlin, who some of you will remember, in the room came and approached me and asked if I would preach at a convocation. I was like, okay, yeah, sure. And he was like, take Romans 8. And I said, okay, cool. So sweet 21-year-old Aubrey got up there and shared her testimony, and I learned that I had a voice on stage and that I had an ability to exegete God's word in some sense. But I got off the stage and he looked at me and he says, I can't wait for Dr. Smith to get a hold of you. And that was a moment where I was like, thank you, Lord, that I'm getting the next 3.5 years to really just rest and take in and to learn these skills and to form really an ability to correctly exegete something, to form a sermon. I think on that side of ministry, I would have not been able to teach or preach in any capacity without going to seminary, whether that's Beeson or any other school. I wasn't able to really have, you have your raw natural skills, but just the ability of listening and taking in the wisdom of those who have done this for so much longer than you is just, there's nothing tradable in that specific area. And then also just the sanctification that happens is just, it doesn't happen in other places. When you're rubbing shoulders with those who are desiring to pursue God's calling on their life, seminary is that one place where everyone really, you hope and pray, everyone has the same motivation and that we're all going towards the same goal. And that was definitely my experience at Beeson. And there's 2 girls in the room who are 2 of my interns. We talk a lot about theological education in the future and just how much it shapes you to do all the things that you're doing right now, really maybe with the voice of God deep within your heart, so that you can minister out of a place of fullness rather than out of a place of just your own wisdom.
Thank you. Aubrey and Abby, with the first question, you didn't really get into how you found your jobs in ministry. So I wonder if you both can share those steps that were taken. And then for all of you, for those in the room who are thinking about, how do I find a job in ministry? Do I wait 14 years? Maybe? Or are there things that you have learned along the way, or mentoring other women, or even walking alongside men and women as it relates to things to consider with placement and finding a job in ministry?
Yeah, I can go first. So I would say the start to finding a full-time job in ministry started by interning as a Samford student. I just reached out to the women's minister at Brook Hills. She didn't have an internship set up, and I said, can I come shadow you? Can I see what you do during the week? And that experience, number one, gave me networking opportunities that are just immeasurable. Just her network of people allowed me to just go ahead and start making those connections. In a city like Birmingham, those types of ministry connections there's nothing like them. They're so important, especially for women. I think so often men network in the church, and your pastors are going to know each other, the senior pastors are going to know their staff and know how to kind of make those moves and help encourage people. But it's really the women on staff that are going to help you make those networking connections. So my first place into stepping into this role was networking. And then it was just being open to God giving me a role I did not expect. So I'm in youth ministry, never thought I would be in youth ministry, went to Beeson very much saying I want to be a women's minister, And I am. They're just 12 through 18 and much more hormonal. And this job came about because a friend said a role at another church was not able to go full time, and a friend of mine, a Samford and a Dawson employee, was like, would you consider applying here? So once again, just a networking opportunity, and a friend who had prayed a lot for this position to be filled with someone who could nurture the students at our church, and that's how I got that role. I just gave her my resume, and she took it to my now boss.
Like I said, my husband and I were in a lot of environments where there just weren't any opportunities for me. So I would say the reality is we had to leave somewhere that was very comfortable for us and go somewhere that was not very comfortable for us, because simply it just had opportunities for me to be able to do what I felt called to do. So I think the first thing would really just be honest about where are you serving and are there opportunities for you there. If you're at a church that doesn't let women preach and you feel called to preach, you're probably not going to get the job that you want. And I think it's important to just acknowledge that and maybe not waste too much effort and energy trying to change that. For this current job, we were at a different church just as very involved lay people while we were in seminary, and we're looking for an internship. And really this church just happened to have an associate pastor position that was open that they had not been able to fill. And so they asked both me and my husband to fill that role. We were each part-time as interns until they could hire somebody. And spoiler alert, they hired us. So that is really just sort of what Aubrey said. It really is just this combination of kind of knowing the right people, being in the right place at the right time, and we call that the sovereignty of God. So being open to what the Lord might have for you, it probably will be nothing that you could dream up or imagine for yourself, because that's just how he rolls. So.
Well, as I said, I love to work also in the church. So I was the associate pastor at Trinity Baptist Church for 14 years. But during the time that I got invited to come there to serve, actually I was just going to help with the women's ministry at that point. I was at the church that I am now. And the opportunities, as you were just talking, weren't available for me to preach and teach the way that I saw God calling me to be used in the church. And so, but being out there, being open, serving in the way that I could, got me recognition, and I was able to network and meet a pastor who was open and who asked me to come and serve. And at first he would just sort of hang in and sit around, and then the women invited him to leave so that we could do what we needed to do. And then that role just continued to grow and grow as just loving God's people and being there. But I agree that sometimes we have to leave where we're comfortable, because I didn't want to leave my church, but at the same time, I knew that God had a call on my life. And so being open, and I can love God's people anywhere. So that worked for me. As a chaplain, if someone is feeling called to be a chaplain, then it's important that you complete your MDiv, and people are doing all kinds of gymnastics to get equivalencies, but there's nothing better than having that complete MDiv when you start to become a chaplain or work on that. And then you have to have at least 4 units of clinical pastoral education, and you need to be good and selective, I think, about where you're going to do that, because you want to get the best possible training you can get. We have great programs in Birmingham, UAB, and of course at Brookwood Baptist Health. And so that's really important to get in a place where you're going to really learn, get an opportunity to be inundated with this really, really hard work. And then you'll be able to probably secure a job, because the training that you do and the interviews that you have, they're going to be wanting to know about all these layers and layers of experiences that you have. And when you work in a system that affords you the opportunity to meet people where they are at all these different intersections and all these different walks of life, then it opens you up to be able to be prepared for what God has for you. But I think you need to be prepared, and you need to be open.
I don't have too much to add to all of the great wisdom that has already been mentioned, other than, I guess I would say, or repeat, serve, volunteer. If you're not getting paid for what you're doing, if you don't have that opportunity, the reason I was able to walk onto a position at Shades is because for 14 years I had been a great volunteer, and I had experience in really all the things that then I was just getting paid to do. I had been doing it all anyway. So serve and volunteer as much as you can. I have a lot of opportunity to hire people at Shades onto our team, and Julie being one right back there, just joined us last month. And if there's two people equally qualified on paper, the one who has the most volunteer and who is currently serving, that's who I'm going to go with. Another little secret I've learned, because I work with a whole lot of men, whining gets you nowhere. It doesn't work. And so, you keep that positive attitude, you work hard, you get your education, and you pray like crazy for God to open the right doors. And just like all of them has said, it may not be the dream job. That's usually not where we start. But if you're called to serve the local church and local church opens up, we take that responsibility and we go with it. If it's chaplaincy, whatever, it's not going to be the dream job probably to start with, but it can become your dream job. Or it can lead to what that next step is that you may have never even thought about, but it's actually what God has right there waiting for you.
Thank you. What is one blessing and one challenge you've experienced while serving in ministry? And then what is something that you've learned about ministering on a church staff that you didn't know before you began ministering on a church staff that would be helpful to those of us here?
We'll start back down. The blessings, I could talk all day. I have been immeasurably blessed by working on a church staff, with relationships with people, with walking through life with people. The second time I was at Shades, I was working with adults who happened to be the people who were the parents when I was children's minister. And so, I've had 25 years of life with people, and you cannot trade history with people. So that's been one of the biggest blessings is a long tenure and the relationships with people. But working on a staff, encouraging each other, encouraging younger staff. I told at lunch today, I said, somehow I'm going to throw this in. Bradley Patton, who's just turned 32 years old, said, hey, you want to go to lunch with John and me? John is 32 years old too. And so today, I went to lunch with two 32-year-old men just because they invited me. And I said, somehow I'm going to throw that in about good working relationships. They're younger than my children. But just building those relationships with all generations is just a great blessing too. I would say the biggest challenge for me has been, as far as family and time, we worked really hard to make sure that when the boys were growing up that we went to church as a family, even though I was working on Sunday, but I wasn't going to work. And I went to work during the week, and we went to church together. And, Barry served too, so it wasn't unusual for them that we were both doing things at church. But trying to keep that separate is just really important when you have a family. I still have something in my office that one of my sons printed out probably when he was in 6th grade, and he put every day of the week and all of these times, and he had Minister Graves' work hours, and he had the off times were when boys are hungry and things like that. It was just, I've kept it in my office because it always helps me remember that family comes first. We work hard and we put in our hours, but family is important. And even just as a grandmother, I knew I was going to throw that in too, that I have 5 grandchildren. I was at 1st grade Bible presentation a few weeks ago at Shades with my twin 1st grade grandsons. And I had my name tag on because it was a Sunday afternoon and I work on Sundays. And he looked at me and he said, Nana, take that badge off. And I said, why? And he said, because you're my Nana and I don't want somebody to ask you to work. And I thought, even at 6, that they catch that. And so I said, absolutely, right now I am not working. I am Nana at 1st grade Bible presentation. And I took that thing off and put it in my purse. And I was a proud Nana.
I would say that when I think about the blessings, that there are just too many to name, but there's been a lot of tragedy in my life. Both of my children are with the Lord. My husband, Jeffrey, as I shared, died the week after our 5th anniversary. And so, but the blessing in the work that I do, whether it's in the church or whether it's at the hospital, has been how God has used the pain in my life to help me join somebody else. Whether it's been a person that even, I've worked with people who didn't even speak English, but I have a comprehension and an understanding of that deep loss and how I can join them. And so the blessing has been that God has taken this pain and helped me to be with and be present with others. The challenge has been that I really have, a heart just for God's people anywhere, and how I can be rejected because of my race or because of my gender, and not taking it personally. And that's been a hard lesson for me. I haven't arrived. I'm still working on it. And the surprise, even in the church, that there have been times that I stood up to preach and I saw people get up and walk out because they don't believe in women in ministry, even where I am now, even where I served for 14 years. And that's very painful and it's been shocking. But if you stay faithful, if you continue to be how God wants you to be, I've seen many, many people turn that thing around, and it's God that needs to do that. We just need to be faithful and do what God has called us to do, God has assigned us to do, and not be hateful because people are hateful to us.
The biggest challenge, well, there are lots, because we're working with people, which is also a joy, but people are sinful, and that is just an all-encompassing challenge. But we've also, I started working out in youth ministry when I came on full-time because our youth pastor had left, and that was the vacancy, and I didn't really feel called to youth ministry, but that was the need, and so I was stepping into it, and I would say, I sort of had a lot of expectations for how that should go because they hadn't really had like a good youth leader for a while, and I had been very hopeful that it would sort of explode under my ministry, and it did not. And we're meeting in our house right now, and I have a 2-year-old and a 6-month-old, and it's just chaos whenever we have youth group. And so I think just sort of handling expectations, because the reality is we're not called to be successful, we're called to be faithful. And that has taken a lot of humility on my part and just submitting to the Lord in everything that we do in ministry. Because even though He calls us to certain things and He equips us for everything, it doesn't always have the results that we sort of expect or hope for. And so just sort of trusting Him with that. And one blessing that has been, there's been a million, like everybody said, but one thing that's been really cool is I started meeting with a group of women who are in their 70s and 80s to pray every week. And we've been doing this for a couple months now, and I was not able to meet for a full month on our weekly days because life has happened, and they started meeting without me there. And that's awesome, because that's when ministry is working, when you don't have to be the one facilitating it. And so that's been such a big blessing to me, not to mention the fact that they pray for me and with me for all different types of needs of the church. But that's been awesome. And they see me as a pastor, even though I'm 40, 50 years younger than them, which is really crazy and great.
Okay, one of the blessings of, I'll say of my current job and then just of getting to do ministry. My current job is getting to see students faithfully follow Jesus and make Him known in their schools and with their friends. This afternoon I'm going to a Bible study where they're inviting one of their Muslim friends at school, and they're having this comparison talk every week where one shares about Islam and what they share about Christianity, and just getting to walk with girls who have everything they've ever needed, and they are stepping out in boldness and doing the thing that's different than what their friends are doing. That has been one of the most, that's just been, a blessing that I never imagined in my own life. And then another blessing is just that the Lord has put me in a place where I truly get to use my gifts. And that's a blessing I would want to pray over all of you, no matter what world you're working in. Just that you get to be in a place where you feel called to serve and use the gifts that you have. That truly is such a blessing, and it makes just the day so joyful when you get to go and do the things you know God has called you to do. One of the challenges, as they have mentioned, is just people, and I have had a pretty rough first year of relational ministry, to say the least, with some specific things Satan has worked out to come just target me, and that has been just a large challenge of working with teenage girls. If you didn't know, teenage girls are really struggling these days, and social media, mental health, all the things just compounds to so much for them. And so I think the challenge of just feeling that burden, and something I wish I would have learned earlier, like right before I started, would have been this, just when people are sinful and they don't really want your help, it's going to hurt when you're trying to help them, and you're going to have to learn how to protect your heart and bring it to the Lord, rather than to continue to think that people are going to stop being mean or stop wanting the ways that they want rather than the things that you want for them. Again, last was the church staff, and I think I would say finding out as much as you can about the culture of your church staff before joining it. I am so thankful for the church staff that I serve on. And that's not to say that you should judge it or you shouldn't join it if you realize, okay, there might be some toxic things about this church staff, but just knowing that you're doing ministry with a team, prayerfully, like even if it's just you and one other pastor, and that really is going to affect all of your ministry, because we're the body of Christ, and if one member is hurting, then we're all hurting. And so I think I wish I would have known, and I think in this move to this new church it's been wonderful and I've been really encouraged, but I would just say that's something I wish I would have known before pursuing vocational ministry, is how important that is.
Can I add to that too? Because I forgot to answer that part of the question. If you are on a church staff and you're experiencing some unhealth or whatever, and there's some dysfunction, which I shouldn't say if, I should say when. I think it's important to just sort of evaluate, like there are obviously some things, and we're in a culture where it's like protect yourself, set up boundaries, like run away from unhealth. But I have bad news, the grass is not greener anywhere else, it's brown everywhere. So just keep that in mind when you're dealing with church staff dynamics. And if my church staff is listening, I love y'all, you know that. But there's always going to be conflict. And so you're just going to have to sort of, I love what Aubrey said, is just sort of kind of figure out how do people engage and receive feedback, and you're just going to have to get to know how to work with people. But guess what? You have to figure that out at a regular job too. So it's just ministry, and it just feels like the stakes are a little bit higher sometimes.
Thank you. I'm going to ask one more question and then open it up to the group. As we think about healthy male-female relationships, I wonder if you can say a word about what your experience has been like working in an environment where you might be the only woman, or there aren't a lot of women. How can women work well with men? And then any kind of word of encouragement for both the men and the women in the room.
I could start. Okay, I would have to start with prayerfully finding men in ministry who see you as an equal will be paramount to your pursuit of ministry. And I would say if you are an undergrad and you want to pursue ministry, Beeson is a place that has a lot of those. Not every single one of them. I say that in generosity towards all the men at Beeson. But finding other people, finding specifically men, I would say for me, and since I'm younger and this is really right at the beginning of my ministry call, it's been finding older pastors who can pour into me and who see what I've been called to and allowing me to step into those roles to serve alongside them. That has really been the ways that I've seen just that partnership. All the roles that I've served in ministry have been specifically over the girls of that ministry, whether it's been college ministry or student ministry. But learning that partnership, serving alongside, and allowing yourself, or I guess, allowing the person who's leading the team, if that's a man, to allow you to have a voice to speak over the population that you're serving specifically. And if they're not recognizing that, then asking them to recognize that, helping them alongside of that, I think has been something that has really benefited my relationships. I would say I've worked under two wonderful young pastors. I'm actually 6 days older than my boss, so he went to Samford too. So we're learning that dynamic of how do I serve alongside his leadership. But really, I would just say finding young men, since most of you are pursuing that call to ministry from an undergrad perspective, who want to respect you for who God's called you to be. I don't know if I really answered the question in that, but.
But you didn't talk about your time as president of Beeson's student body and who your vice president was.
I didn't. Her husband.
It was my husband. They were a great team. I would say I now have a unique situation because I do work with my husband, and that's been so amazing for a lot of reasons. One that comes to mind is very recently we had a couple over after the kids went to bed who have been going through infertility and have just lost another baby. And it was the four of us sitting around, and I was able, because of my position on staff, because of our relationship, I was able to really speak pastorally to him as an authority and as a woman's voice. And that opportunity really would not have existed were I not in the role that I'm in. And he heard what I had to say, and it meant something to him, and he really took it seriously. And again, that's because of the position that I have at the church, that he gets to see me up there on Sunday mornings and can trust me as a spiritual guide and authority in his life. And that was a really powerful moment for both me and Court, my husband, just sort of realizing that we were all four in the room equals in that sense. But another thing that's been really meaningful to me, just like Aubrey was saying, I have someone who works with me and for me, and he was a classmate of mine at Beeson. And he was one of the people that Aubrey's talking about, one of the men that really has been very supportive of women. His wife is in the room. My friend Dallas that works for me, is so, we just complement each other in our role of youth ministry. Somebody has to take the guys to lunch. Before I hired him, I think I went to breakfast with one of our high school guy students who's more mature, and it just felt weird, and it just didn't work. It was really great, but you really do have to have both, and you want to have a certain type of guy that works with you and for you who, Dallas is so respectful of me and does see me as a boss, but we're also friends. And so that really works. And that makes our ministry really thrive. And we're partners, and that's how it works. And I would say that just being able to have him by my side is just really meaningful to me. And again, because I do have my husband and we do work together the most, but having him and Dallas in this role as a coworker has just been a really powerful experience, I think, for both of us, just to see, we're co-laborers for the gospel, and that's what we get to do together.
Well, I think it's nice if you're able to, because you refer to young pastors, but they're not all going to be young. Mm-hmm. And there's this learning curve that's there. So you have to be really confident in the fact that God has called you and ordained you, whether you're ordained in the church yet or not, but ordained by God to be in ministry. Confident in that. Respect yourself and demand respect, not, with an attitude, but there have to be boundaries. And I've had to do a lot of teaching, even when people will say, or the men that I've worked with would say that they respect women in ministry, and then they would say undercutting things, and not even be aware. So you have to be courageous enough to say, I know your heart, and I don't believe you meant that, but this is how I heard it. This is how it felt. Because they're not just saying it to you, then all these other women in the church and everything. And so we are in that position, will be in that position to speak up in ways that nobody else can. I've been in a situation where an ordination happened at the church, and it happened to be that two men were being ordained. But everything that was said was when a man does this and when a man does that, and then at the end of it, all ministers, let's come up and lay hands. And my husband started shrinking down in the chair because he knew I wasn't going to move. Because you said, men this, men that, men that. And then now you want me to come up and hold my hands out here and be all happy about it. When, you know, and it was uncomfortable for me because I like people to like me and be pleased, but I felt like I was being disrespectful to myself and to the other women to participate. I become complicit. And it was a hard, uncomfortable situation. But then later he came back and apologized, not to me, but to the congregation of women for misleading the men in that way. And so I'm asking you to be courageous and to be bold. And it's great if people just automatically respect you and everything. But if it doesn't happen, you know, and you decide that everything isn't worth fighting about. But there are some things that you need to stand up for, and I just encourage you to be bold enough to do that.
Yeah, I'll pick up where it really in the last sentence about everything is not worth fighting about. I look at ministry, serving with men and with women, a lot like parenting. Everything is not a battle in parenting. It could be. But some things just, does it really matter? Is everything a battle, particularly with teenagers? And sometimes in ministry, it's that same way too. Everything can't be a battle for men or for women. There are lots of men who serve on staffs and they don't feel like they're getting whatever they deserve. And there's lots of women who serve on staff that feel that way. There's a lot of women who get more than they deserve, and there's a lot of men who get more than they deserve. But everything is not a battle. And so I think we just have to be very conscious of what we're called to do. And if it's really important, we need to stand up for what we think is right. And if it's one of those things of, maybe this isn't the best time, maybe I may win, but how is it going to affect the church, or how is it going to affect other people? And so we've just got to be very sensitive to God's Spirit for what those battles need to be. In my particular role right now, I live in a man's world, literally. I'm over a section of adults, well, really all adult leaders, and when we're in a meeting, about 90% of the people will be in the room. There may be 100 people and less than 10 women. And on the executive staff, I'm the only woman. For the first many years that I was at Shades, I was the only woman on the ministerial staff. And through those years, I've learned that men will respect us when we work hard. And like I said, the whining thing, I'm just saying that because I've watched women ministers that they just whine. And it's just irritating. It irritates me, and it irritates women, and it irritates men. But just whining about what I don't have and what I can't do. Just work hard. Do your job. Work hard. Listen to the Spirit and follow Him. And most of the time, I think we get the respect from men. Not always. I've had situations not, but most of the time, I think we do. And I think they see us as fellow ministers who are all working for the same purpose, which is the glory of God in whatever position that we're in.
Thank you. I'm going to open it up to questions just for the sake of our recording. Whoever goes first, if you'll repeat the question. But do y'all have any questions? If you have to leave, that's fine. Don't worry.
If you could go back to being a 20-year-old undergrad who doesn't know really necessarily where their calling is, what's one piece of advice you would give someone who's 20 years old, who's called to ministry? What's like your biggest one piece?
Who wants to repeat the question?
I can repeat the question. What is your biggest piece of advice to someone who is in undergrad, who is pursuing a vocational call to ministry?
You want to answer?
Well, this is just practical. If you do feel like you're being led to church ministry, just I feel like we've said this, but just practice, look for those opportunities where you can get involved in a local church and do stuff. Something really practical that was told to me was, if you feel like you're being called to preaching and teaching ministry, I was terrified of speaking in front of people, like terrified. And so she encouraged me to make sure, as much as the church would allow, like, let me read scripture, let me do prayers, let me do as much as I can as soon as I could, to kind of get rid of that anxious feeling as much as possible early on. And that was great, just practical advice, and it was really helpful for me. So that's practical advice, but that's not totally about calling, so I don't know if you'll have anything else.
I would say if you're 20 years old and undergrad and you think you may have a calling, keep pursuing that education. And, you know, if you get to the end, you get a seminary degree and you realize God hadn't called me, it's not wasted years. You know, you can always use that. You may then have a few more years that you have to go back to school because you're in the wrong field. But I would say it would never be wasted years, and I would rather get to the end and have that education and pursue something else than regret that I've gotten this far and, oh, I wish I had. The education is irreplaceable.
And also something else, if you're a 20-year-old woman who thinks she's being called to ministry, you probably are being called to ministry. But whereas my husband growing up has had people tell him his whole life, you should try seminary, you should be a pastor one day, I never really had those voices. And it came in different ways of like, oh, like you're really good at praying, or like, oh, you're really good at leading this Bible study. It just is different. And so for women, I think we don't hear that as much, of like, you have these gifts and callings, because we don't really know what to do with those gifts and callings. So I'd say if you have that feeling that's sort of stirring up inside of you, I really do think that that's probably the Holy Spirit telling you to do something about that, because we don't have as many external voices telling us, because no one really knows what to say, you know? So start with that.
Yeah, I was going to say something similar. Just believe it and lean into it. Because I started thinking, it's been a long time when I was 20, but that I was denying that. And I've had that unction in me a long time, but it took me a long time past 20 to accept it. So if you're feeling that call, then lean into it.
Talk to women in ministry.
Yeah.
Hunt us down.
We'll give out our cell phone numbers and our emails. And I think we're Googleable, so you can find it.
I would say one last thing is start being a minister now. You don't have to have a job to minister and disciple people. I think my most practical ministry experience came from being a senior at Samford and discipling sophomores at Samford. Just start now. And that's a lifelong thing. It has nothing to do with being on a church staff. You can be a nurse and also on the side be discipling 3 wonderful, sweet girls, or just be walking alongside with people already in God's Word. then it becomes a career, and that's wonderful, and it's nice to be paid for something that you absolutely love to do and you do naturally. But you should be doing those things naturally. That's what it's about, making disciples who make disciples.
I have another question that's not on my sheet, or one of you can repeat it so I'm not leaning over. As it relates to pay and salary and benefits, how did you approach that? Did you feel like there was negotiation power? How have you navigated? Because you said, being paid for something you love to do. Has that been a challenge, or do you have any tips regarding, as a woman who's going into a church job, regarding salary and negotiation?
We don't negotiate salaries at Shades. Nobody knows what anybody else makes. And I suppose if you were interviewing and the salary didn't seem appropriate, you could question it. I'm sure you could. I've sometimes felt like I was appropriately paid, and sometimes I didn't. And one time I did I asked about it, and I was told that, when you look at all the books or whatever, that compare the ministries, that yes, I was being paid appropriately, and I was glad to hear that. We all wish we made more money. I forgot what the question was. Do you feel like that you're paid appropriately, or can you negotiate? I don't know that it's wrong.
Any comments about negotiating or even knowing what should I be paid for this role, and anything that would be beneficial as relates to pay or salary?
I had some experience with this recently. I came on full time at the church in June of 2021, so was that last year? And I was not pregnant yet, but I was about to be. And so when they gave me my package, luckily my church, because my husband and I are there together, they're paying us equally as the associate pastors. So that was a no-brainer. It would have looked really bad if they had paid him more and not me. That would have been so bad. But obviously maternity leave came up, and the policy they had in place was not great because they had not had a young woman in my position in decades. So we revisited, and that was something that was really hard for me because I felt like I was such a burden for bringing that up and saying that this is not acceptable to me. And I think it was 2 weeks or something. And, and it was at the time they were sort of they were horrified that that's what it was. They just hadn't read the handbook in however long. And so we went back and forth. But it was really an interesting experience. And I just had to keep thinking, okay, this is weird because maternity leave, but if I were a man, if our roles were reversed, would they be treating court this way? And that's what I kind of had to go by to make sure I was okay, yeah, court would have no problem asking for more time off. In fact, he did ask for a better paternity leave. So we just sort of, that was something that was really hard, but I'm so glad that I fought for it because the church should be, and then that got into the whole theology of family, and the church should be leading in this industry of how we should care for young moms, and so we can lead by example. And so it was a really good experience for me to sort of speak up in that. But I would just say, that's something to be mindful of as women. We do have to think about maternity leave, even if you're not married, even if you're not pregnant. When you get that package, look at that, because if not, who knows, they might not have looked at the handbook in several years, and you need to say something.
So in the past 3 years, I think I've had two very different experiences with this. One being in a part-time role and desiring to bring that to full-time and being told no. And I say that from the way that situation was handled was a difficult thing to be a young woman in ministry. Because it was hard to remove my gender and my positions that church believed I could be in from the situation of negotiation. So in that, I would say protect your heart when those types of situations happen, and don't let that drive you away from doing full-time ministry, because it opened the doors for me to be in a position where I feel very well compensated. And Dawson is very similar to Shades in that no one discusses salaries, and it's just, I think some of that just protects you from worldliness, because it doesn't really matter. It's not really what we're doing the job anyway. But I would say in the benefits of working at a larger church are well helping benefits and things like that, and I think a church should provide for you. It should be a place where you feel like you can do this job well and not feel this extreme burden if they're capable. Obviously, that's not true in every situation. But the maternity leave is another situation that happened at Dawson before our friend Kara took the position there. There wasn't a maternity leave on in the handbook at all. Because no woman who had ever come through had been pregnant while she was a full-time staff member. There was a woman back there who had been pregnant as a part-time staff member, but no one had ever been a full-time staff member. So once again, just a specific place that sometimes the church has not really stepped up in the ways that the world have stepped up to make sure that's provided. And I do think that's something to make sure if you want to have kids that you can be provided for.
And we also texted about
We did.
our jobs, and we have another friend that's also, and so we were sending each other our job just while we were all three getting hired kind of at the same time, which is crazy. So we were sending, what's your salary? What are your benefits? And so your church might not tell you what the other associate pastors are making, but if you have friends in ministry, another perk of seminary, then you can text each other and get that information. Y'all don't be shy with that information, because that doesn't benefit anybody.
If you could share, what has been the most helpful thing or things that you've all been through seminary or education, what's been the most helpful thing that male professors in particular have either done or said to encourage you in your pursuit of vocational ministry?
He wants to repeat the question.
What have male professors done that have been most beneficial and helpful to us? For me, they've been very encouraging and supportive. And when I have doubted myself, that they saw things in me and spoke things out to me that I didn't even, I just wouldn't have articulated even if I thought it was there. Particularly for me, Dr. Thielman and Dr. Matthews were just very, very supportive of me. And when I came to Beeson, I was the only African-American woman there. And in most classes, I was the only woman in the class for at least 2 years. And all of the professors were welcoming, even when the male students weren't, and made me feel like I belonged. And so it was a great experience for me.
I took a class on the pastoral epistles, so it was first and second Timothy and Titus. I was one of 2 females in the room. That was fun. But the professor, it was Dr. Thielman, was just immediately off the bat. I mean, for all of the passages that, I think a lot of my male classmates could have really pointed to me and made me defend myself or something, right? He just left no room for that to happen, and was just so kind and gracious, and just really set classroom expectations. Really just from day one of this is not up for discussion or debate in this space, because it will not be tolerated, any sort of whatever. And also talking to male students that maybe would go on to be pastors where women are not allowed to use their gifts, really challenged them in those spaces. I don't know, I could talk about it forever. I've got a million different stories in my head, but they were just really good at creating safe spaces for us, like Cecelia was saying.
Kind of going along that, and maybe a specific answer would be speaking to the classroom and the men in the classroom specifically about how you support the women who are there. There's something so affirming. This is something my senior pastor at Dawson does so well. It's just affirming the women in the room and affirming the women who are working, or the women in the classroom, just with almost that overconfidence, so that they can kind of weigh their options of am I here to support these women as well, or I know where my professor stands on this, so am I going to stand in the same place? And maybe it can even allow some of those conversations. I know some situations that happened for me at Beeson, those were the moments where you could kind of see some of the classmates who weren't super supportive. It kind of led to there being more confrontational situations where their minds could be opened, which honestly was more beneficial even than Dr. Smith holding my hands across the table and us sobbing together, which was very nourishing to my soul, but it didn't really change how I felt in the classroom.
Something I've been thinking about recently, because wanting to go into ministry, is I have family members or close friends who are not followers of the Lord, and I know you can't all see me, but it's an interesting dynamic, I think, when they find out that you want to go into ministry, or even how you bear. And I know we're not supposed to bear the weight of people who don't know the Lord necessarily, but the way that I bear the weight is just different. And I'm sure y'all can relate to that, just having like a sibling who I'm very close to, who just doesn't see and how to navigate that relationship. So I'd just be interested in y'all speaking on how you navigate like being a minister, but what that looks like outside of the church in contexts where you're not like in work, like family contexts or like Walmart, like, you know, just like what does that look like in a different setting?
I can try to repeat it. I really loved your story alongside it, so we'll see. How do you be who you are as a minister of the gospel, but also just be a family member and a friend and a common person in different relationships? What does it look like to be a minister in different relationships in your life, and how do you kind of navigate that?
In family, and I don't particularly have family who are not supportive of ministry or who are not believers, but I try not to be a minister when I'm in other situations. You know, it's not so much that it makes people uncomfortable, even family members, but it just, I don't want them to always feel like I'm preaching at them or judging, or, you know, when they're not bad, but, you know, just maybe a little coarse. And I have a family full of boys and men. Trying not to be the holier than thou person, but still being who I am and who I would be if I wasn't a minister. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. Take the title minister away and just be who I am, and not be preachy, and try not to throw around the minister piece, and just be the sister or the daughter or the mother. I know this doesn't exactly relate to it, but just that what I said a while ago about taking that name tag off, because Hudson wanted me to be Nana and not a minister. You know, just trying with friends and with family to just be that Christian woman, and just be feel like you're a normal person, a normal part of the family. I'm not sure if I've answered the question, but it's a hard thing, and it's so much of the time our identity, or my identity, is wrapped up in the position or the title, and I value it so, and I'm so thankful for how God's blessed me in it. But I'm learning that my family doesn't necessarily look at it that same way, that I don't want them ever to resent the church or me because the minister always came first.
A couple of things came to mind. I'd say first off, with people that are close to you or strangers, they're always going to assume something when they ask you. Oh my gosh, you know, when you're on a plane, my husband's like, please don't ask, please don't ask. What do you do? Oh, pastor. There's always going to be, like, people will have like a visceral response to that, whether they express it or they're just internalizing it because they've all either had a great experience or not. And then guess what? Next layer, when you say you're a woman pastor, that just brings out, like, there's so many things. You know, people either try to talk you out of it, or they'll think that you're like this like crazy progressive person that like worships witches and stuff on the side too. So there's just like a range of things that will be like, you can't control how people perceive you because the perception's already there in their heads before you even say the word. So just keep that in mind. And I'd say that's probably true with family as well. Like, my mom teaches a Bible study, and so she'll call me on my off days and ask me to help her plan her Bible study lesson. And I'm like, Mom, that's work for me, so no. Like, you know, and so you kind of have to do a little bit of boundaries in that sense. And then just sort of know people who don't understand this calling, well, yeah, they'll just have different ideas of what it is. Like, oh, that's so great, like that you're giving back to the community in this way. And you're like, well, it's a little more than that, but sure. And so you just kind of have to know that you can't control how other people are going to respond to that question of what do you do? I'm a pastor. But yeah, all you can do is just try to live your life out and, just be that, you're always going to be pastoral, and then realize that people do expect that of you. So then when you are at lunch with friends, they do kind of expect you. Like, don't shy away from asking pastoral questions, because you do have that label, which is kind of like a get out of jail free card. Like, I can ask you about your spiritual life because I'm the pastor. And that's been really cool for me and some of my friends that are not believers, just to be able to say, like, well, you don't know I'm a pastor, so I'm going to say something spiritual. And then to be able to probe a little deeper into their lives and ask questions that maybe no one else in their lives are asking.
One more question? Oh, I saw it.
I know that you talked about this a little bit already, but how do you navigate the balance, which would be specific as a woman, dealing with if you feel like the Lord has put a calling on your life to maybe have kids or to be a wife and have that family aspect, and there may be cultural pressure or from the church to stay at home, but also the pressure of vocational ministry, and how can those two coexist, and how do you see the main challenges in overcoming those?
I'm not good at repeating it.
Okay, I can repeat it. What are the main challenges of the balance, or we learned a word recently on our church staff thing, like congruence maybe between family life and being a minister as a woman specifically, with feeling more of a burden to serve your family in specific ways?
I guess also, I know I've been talking a lot, sorry, but this is very fresh on my mind, obviously. I actually have had a couple of men in leadership at our egalitarian church ask me if I want to have more kids because they're worried that my workload's too heavy. And I said, well, my husband's across the hall. I don't think you asked him that question. But I do think that it is, I've said that a lot. That's my go-to. Because I do think there is that, and I know it is, it's different. And I have a lot of friends that have babies right now that are starting to pull back and go part-time and, maybe not working at all. And I sort of ask myself, oh gosh, like, Lord, what are you calling me to do? And ultimately, I think it comes down to calling. So right now, I feel like the Lord is calling me to full-time ministry. There's also this other element of knowing, my husband is a pastor at this church, so if I ever did go part-time, I would still be working full-time and I wouldn't be getting paid for it. So let's just do it right now. But I also think that it is so important. I mean, the way I can be the best pastor is if I am a fantastic mom. And so that's my priority, is my girls and raising them up in the faith. I mean, that's how the faith in the Old Testament primarily grew, right? It was passing it on to your kids. So that should be very much like the most important part of my life, and I see it as such. And I heard a priest, Tish Harrison Warren, if y'all don't know her, you should definitely look her up. She's a rock star. But she talked about, people that stay home with their kids, and this is just across the board, people that stay home with their kids sort of wish they were back at work. People that are at work full-time sort of envy their friends that get to stay at home, and maybe people part-time have got the happy medium and have figured it all out. I don't know, but I think that it's just important to know that you're always going to be longing for something different, because that's just part of what living in this world is like, is longing for something that perfection and wholeness that just won't come from things that are on this earth, either a job or family or anything like that.
And part of my story, I guess because of my story, I would answer for the 14 years that I was a stay-at-home mom while Barry was pastoring, I 100% felt fulfilled in my call to ministry. I didn't feel like that he was able to do his and I was doing mine. I was 100% fulfilled because I like I said, I volunteered as much as I wanted to, which was all the time. But I was also that stay-at-home wife and mom, and so I don't know that necessarily getting a paycheck or not is whether we're fulfilling our calling. It's what we're doing with our time at certain seasons of life. And what you're doing in this season doesn't mean that's what's going to be right for the next season.
And I've never been able to be a stay-at-home mom when I was in the library or when in ministry, but my children always came first. My husband, my children, and to make sure that what was important to them, that I was there. And I think in ministry, I have more ability to move things around than I did when I was working at the library, and I did that for 18 years. I have more flexibility, or made more flexibility. So I think it's just about paying attention to what's most important to your family, because I never wanted to be so great at ministering to everybody else, and then my children are feeling like they were left out. So I just think it's your intentionality.
I would add like one comment. So I'm single, and I think in this area, specifically for single women, there is a balance of not just because you're single means that you don't have that time at home, or you don't need to be caring for those other people in your life. It shouldn't be just something, there's a totally different burden that comes from being a wife and being a mother, 100%. But there is also a burden that should be for the people who are just in your life, and the tendency of single women just being sucked into the church, not even as just ministers, also just as women, which sometimes is exactly where they need to be, but sometimes can also be just because it's an easy person to call on who doesn't have a toddler at home. So I would say just trying to find that balance of allowing yourself as a woman in ministry to not feel like just because the most natural thing to do will be to volunteer, will be to serve, it doesn't mean that your time is just readily available to everyone to use. And I think that's something specifically hard for women to guard, and I would just, no matter what season you're in, and I know as my seasons change, like different parts of my time will become more valuable, but just because you're a woman doesn't mean everyone has access to your time. And I think that would be, I wish I would have understood that earlier. And yeah.
Thank you. Okay, will you help me thank them for their and just sharing your stories with us. Thank you. This has been wonderful for me. I hope it's been helpful for you all. Let me pray for them, and as well as for all of you. And then if you want to stay for a few minutes and meet them one-on-one, grab some more food or coffee or water, please do so. And thanks for coming today. Heavenly Father, we're so grateful that we have the wonderful gift and opportunity to serve you, to be your witnesses in this place. We are called to a relationship with you, and we are called to take the gospel wherever we are. And so we're so thankful for that privilege. I pray that you would remind us every day that we serve a loving and forgiving God who uses sinful people for his kingdom's purposes. And may we also remember that it's not about us ultimately, but it's about you and your Son, Jesus Christ. And so may we be people who continually point the finger away from ourselves and to your Son. I thank you for these women who have served today on the panel, for their ministries here in Birmingham. I pray that you would continue to bless the work of their hands, guard them from the enemy, lead them not into temptation. I pray that they would feel encouraged in the work that you are giving them, and that you would just be a lamp unto their feet and a light unto their paths. And I pray for the people in this room. I thank you for each of them and for bringing them here today. I ask God that you would meet them in their places of doubt and questions and concerns, in their places of joys and sorrows. We believe what you say in your word, that you are a God who is for us, who can be against us. And I pray that they would all find you to be a faithful, faithful God. We ask these things in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.